So we're 1 minute early, but I think we'll go ahead and start. That's okay with everyone. Welcome. My name is Laurie Silverblatt, and I'm the chair of the Resolutions and Public Policy Committee of Women's League for Conservative Judaism. It is my honor and great pleasure to welcome you to our educational Zoom, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof, Justice, Justice You Shall Pursue. Today, you will hear some of the most highly esteemed experts in their fields who will educate us regarding various aspects of criminal justice reform. Our speakers will give us insights on this important topic based on their amazing work and expertise in this domain. Now, a little housekeeping. Everyone is muted, and we are recording. Due to time constraints, we do not have a Q&A at the end. Instead, if you would send all of your questions in the chat to Marlene Ostrow, we will make sure that we get these questions to the speakers and you will get your answers. We will respond by email, and we appreciate your patience as this may take a few days. Now, if Julia is here, Anne, do you know if Julia is here?
Let me see, Julia. No, she's not here yet.
Okay. Well,
and I am going to, if you'll mind, I'm going to mute all right now. I hadn't done it. So you'll have to unmute, and then anybody else who speaks will have to unmute. Okay.
Thanks, Anne. Okay, so we're now going to have Karen Cooker, the chair of World Affairs, speak a little bit about Women's League, and welcome everybody.
Hello, everybody. I'm Karen Cooker from the Mid-Atlantic region. I'm a proud member of the Resolutions and Public Policy Committee, and I am the International Chair of World Affairs. Thank you for joining us this evening for what I know will be a fascinating and inspiring program presented to give our sisterhoods, affiliates, and members ideas and materials from which to plan events and programming to enrich all our communities and fulfill our aspiration of Tikkun Olam. Women's League and our Resolutions Committee are strictly nonpartisan, but we do believe in challenging our members to become informed and involve themselves in current issues. So now I will turn it back to Lori to introduce our first speakers.
Thank you, Karen. It is my great pleasure to introduce Rabbi Heather Miller, who will provide the Devar Torah today. Rabbi Miller has amazing experience in this domain. And Anne, if you could show the first speaker slide.
First speaker,
please.
Okay.
Rabbi Miller.
Wait 1 second.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Read her bio to everybody. Thank you.
Oh, it's...
Should be the next one. That's our agenda.
Here we go.
Thank you. Rabbi Heather Miller is a professional educator and school leader who is passionate about creating, embracing supportive spaces for all of the intersected identities in both the religious and secular parts of her life. Rabbi Heather merges her skill sets to serve the Jewish community in several capacities as the USCJ board member, co-chair of the Conservative Masorti Movement's Racial Justice Subcommittee, and on the Repair the World Advisory Council, on UJA's Brooklyn Advisory, and as board chair at Amud JOC Torah Academy. Her work has reached over 60,000 people and counting. She is honored to be recognized as one of New York Jewish Week's 36 to Watch in 2023, and to be featured in the nationally syndicated PBS show Table for All with Buki Elegbiday, and was humbled to be asked to speak at the 60th continuation of the March on Washington. Her favorite role of all, however, is as mother of 3 amazing boys who are proudly descended from both freed slaves and Holocaust survivors. And Rabbi Miller, if you'd like to start your speech, we really appreciate your being here.
Thank you so much. So they took Jeremiah and put him down in the pit of Malchiah, the king's son, which was in the prison compound. They let Jeremiah down by ropes. There was no water in the pit, only mud. And Jeremiah sank into the mud. Ebed-Melech, the Cushite, a eunuch who was in the king's palace, heard that they had put Jeremiah in the pit. The king was then sitting at the Benjamin gate, so Ebed-Melech left the king's palace and spoke to the king. "O Lord King, these men have acted wickedly. and all that they did to the prophet Jeremiah. They have put him down into the pit to die of hunger, for there was no more bread in the city. Then the king instructed Ebed-Melech the Cushites, take with you 30 men from here and pull the prophet Jeremiah up from the pit before he dies. So Ebed-Melech took the men with him and went to the king's palace, to a place below the treasury. There they got worn cloths and rags, which let down to Jeremiah into the pit by ropes. And Ebed-Melech the Cushite called to Jeremiah, put the worn cloths and rags under your armpits inside the ropes. Jeremiah did so, and they pulled Jeremiah up by the ropes and got him out of the pit, and Jeremiah remained in the prison compound. That's from chapter 38, verses 6 through 13. In this moment, Jeremiah is put under the jail for being accused for a treasonous prophecy. He could not sit, he could not lay, and I imagine that unless he pressed himself against the walls of the pit, he sank. And that was to be his eternal resting place, never to be thought of again. Ebed-Melech not only advocated for justice to be shown to Jeremiah, he showed care and compassion in lifting him out of this pit of despair. While Jeremiah was not released from the prison compound, his conditions were made more humane. In the world of my day job, I am in the care of youth and young adults who have been thrown into their own pits, and I am blessed to be part of the team to pull them out. I am tasked with helping them carve out a life in a system that is completely stacked against them. No matter how they may want to be rehabilitated, chances are that they will become recidivists because the number of viable options are few and far between. Work programs exist, but depending on the nature of their convictions, they will likely not qualify. There is a chance that they will not qualify for public housing or food assistance programs, all things that they need to help their families stay afloat. There are times when they have to disclose their criminal histories, which can lock them out of job prospects and higher education. Many of them lack motivation to try because it feels like even though they have done their time and atoned for their sins, the punishment never ends. Brian Stevenson once said that we are all more than the worst thing we've ever done. But what I often see is that that thing is what is used to shape the rest of their lives. In a perfect world, the youth I work with would make different choices, but their realities aren't ours. We are privileged to not grow up in a place where we are surrounded by poverty and violence to levels that create a series of forced choices. When gang membership is intergenerational and sometimes literally a matter of life or death, I'd hazard a guess that the vast majority of us will never know what it's like to know with certainty that the only way out of a life of violence is to relocate, because even if they survived being jumped out, they are forever branded by rivals and would forever have to watch their own backs. You and I will never know what it's like to have a child and send that child hundreds of miles away from a life with you in hopes of giving them a better future, one in which they can't grow up to be like you. On Maslow's hierarchy of needs, my kiddos are often starting at a level below the pyramid. After this evening, I hope that you will feel moved to add criminal justice reform to the issues that keep you up at night. Until we fix this broken piece of our world, I will be doing my best to pull as many young people as I can out of the mud and pour as much caring, compassion, and hope into them as I possibly can. Hesed, Tikva, Rachamim, and while I'm at it, Emunah, all values that are baked into our tradition that tell us that we have the capacity to change the trajectory of their futures. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Laura, you have to unmute.
Minor detail. Thank you very much, Rabbi Miller, and thank you for that beautiful and very hopeful Devar. I would now like to introduce Professor Rabbi Aryeh Cohen. Professor Rabbi Aryeh Cohen, PhD, is Professor of Rabbinic Literature and former Chair of the Rabbinics Department in the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies. Dr. Cohen has created and taught most of the courses in the Rabbinics curriculum over more than 2 decades of his affiliation with the Ziegler School. His research and scholarship sit at the intersection of Talmud, Jewish ethics, and social justice activism. This is present in his teaching, especially his senior seminar, Issues of Justice, a project-based learning course in which students have to develop advocacy-based in Jewish text on a social justice issue. His latest book, Justice in the City, an argument from the sources of rabbinic Judaism, emerges from and articulates the same concerns. Dr. Cohen is a co-convener of the Black Jewish Justice Alliance and a member of the Clergy for Black Lives. With Clergy for Black Lives, he co-organized one of the largest memorial demonstrations in downtown LA after the murder of George Floyd. And now it is our pleasure to hear, you can go back to Professor Cohen, please, and to hear him with his presentation.
You have to unmute, sir.
Right.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you. There is an obligation at every Zoom meeting that somebody is muted, and I am happy to have fulfilled that obligation. I will open with a quote from Fania Davis, a long-term social justice activist and restorative justice proponent. Ours is a system that harms people who harm people to show that harming people is wrong. Our system works on the unfounded belief that the way to stop violence is by using violence, whether that is the violence of corporal punishment or timeouts or suspensions or caging or execution or at its extreme war. All violence, as Rabbi Aaron Shmuel Tamaris taught us over a century ago, leads to more violence. Even violence deployed in self-defense leads to more violence in the world and will return as offensive violence. The history of the last century and a half shows that. The history of policing and incarceration in this country shows that. Our current legal system is based on a punitive model. If someone commits a crime, whether that is a property crime like theft or a violent crime such as assault, the basic conceptual framework is that the crime was committed against the state, and the state prosecutes the offender and then punishes the offender. So although the rhetoric of closure is often used in regards to, quote unquote, bringing someone to justice, the person being brought to justice is brought to justice at the behest of the state. A victim of a crime has very little to say in whether or not a specific crime is investigated or prosecuted. Most of this is up to the district attorney and the police department. The victim now has a chance to speak in court only during the so-called victim impact statement, when the victim can describe their experience of the crime and its aftermath. Further, the current system, the punitive justice model or the carceral model, is based on unfounded expectations of the efficacy of deterrence and a broken moral calculus which pretends to be able to define the correct amount of retribution while not taking into account the collateral damage to families and communities and the collateral harms of caging itself. There's little evidence which backs up the idea that caging people deters others from committing crimes. It is only marginally true that caging people deters those people themselves from committing crimes. Furthermore, there is no actual algorithm which is morally defensible, which might serve to assign 3 years of caging rather than 5 or 7 for this or that crime. This is all the more so when we take into account that in addition to the caging itself, there are many other punishments inflicted on those who are incarcerated: assault and rape in prison, deprivation of medical care, among other things. And during COVID, we saw that short sentences could become death sentences. All these are not technically part of the punishment. Moreover, there is both economic and psychological punishment inflicted on the families and communities of the incarcerated. This punitive system, which is broken and ineffective, also impacts areas of society which we would not think of as related to the criminal justice system. For example, synagogues, schools, communal institutions. Operating under a punitive system, children are taught that if they don't share, or if Allison takes Johnny's truck when Johnny was playing with it, the correct response is punitive. Sit in the corner, or you cannot go out to recess, or do more homework. The lesson learned is that we harm people who harm people in order to show that harming people is wrong. This lesson then goes with these children throughout their lives. More than that, there's evidence that students in schools with a harsher punitive system end up incarcerated at a higher rate than students in schools with a more lenient system. This is the school to prison pipeline. The alternative is restorative justice. Restorative justice work is based on the following principles. It is a victim-centered, not offender-centered process. It focuses on the harms of crime rather than the rules or laws that have been broken. It shows equal concern and commitment to victims and offenders, involving both in the process of justice. It works toward the restoration of victims, empowering them and responding to their needs as they see them. It supports offenders while encouraging them to understand, accept, and carry out their obligations to right the wrongs they have caused. It recognizes that while obligations for repair may be difficult for offenders, those obligations should not be used as harms, that is, punishments, and their obligations must be achievable. It provides opportunities for dialogue, direct or indirect, between victim and offender as appropriate, and it finds meaningful ways to involve the community and respond to the community bases of crime. It encourages collaboration and reintegration of both victims and offenders, rather than coercion and isolation. Finally, it shows respect for all parties, victims, offenders, justice officials, and other stakeholders, and gives attention to the unintended consequences of restorative practices used. A restorative justice system, and based on these restorative practices, fulfill that which the psalmist teaches us, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, understood here as the world is built on love. As Martin Luther King has said, and others have said after him, justice is love in action.
Thank you so much, Professor Rabbi Cohen. That was extremely important information for us and very interesting. And now we would like to go to our featured speakers. The first one will be Bob Lincoln, and Karen Cooker will recite the biography for him, a dedicated volunteer for decades with Jewish prisoners. Karen, are you available?
Karen, unmute, please.
It's hard to remember. Is she there?
Yeah, she's unmuting,
Okay, thanks.
I hope.
And then you can pin.
Yeah, but do you want this slide up?
Yeah, no, I like this slide up. Thank you.
Then you have to wait to pin them.
Sounds good. Everything okay?
Now, Karen, you're still muted. Let me see. Yeah, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, why don't I go ahead and read this one and she can read the next one, okay? Is that good? Bob Lincoln is an attorney and certified financial planner, having been a financial advisor for nearly 40 years. Inspired by 4 decades of volunteering by visiting Jewish incarcerated men at a nearby prison, Bob Lincoln has become an activist for criminal justice reform, ending mass incarceration, and creating a safer, sounder society. Bob has been an active member of the Jewish community for 6 decades, serving as synagogues and men's clubs. Bob has been a member of the Pennsylvania Bar since 1976, serves as a member of the Pennsylvania Bar Association's Corrections Committee, is active in the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, the Domestic Affairs Committee of the Jewish Community Relations Council, and is a member of the Pennsylvania Prison Society. He has spoken to attorneys at Gratz College, spoke at and ran programs for the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Philadelphia, the Pennsylvania Bar Institute, numerous synagogues, and dozens of service clubs. Please welcome Bob Lincoln.
Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm Bob Lincoln, and I have been visiting Jewish prisoners for 4 decades through a program that was started by people at my synagogue, Beth Shalom, in Elkins Park. It motivated me to work to end mass incarceration. What is mass incarceration? In the United States, we currently have 1.9 million people incarcerated as we sit here today. This is out of less than 10 million in the entire planet. We are the most incarcerated society in the world and through world history. when did this happen? In 1980, we had 800,000 people incarcerated, and now we have 1.9 million. It actually did hit 2.3 million in the late 2000 teens. So what happened is that society deemed it necessary to increase punishments and to increase sentences, both by increasing the length of the sentence issued and then by eliminating things like letting people out early for good behavior. Without that, that law was passed in 1994 by the Clinton administration that felt that increasing punishments would help make society safer. But the whole thing started back from the 60s. So now we have a situation where we have 1.9 people incarcerated. Over 450,000 of those people have not been convicted of a crime. One of the speakers will be talking about cash bail. I will allude to it just to say that cash bail, which allows people who have money to be released before their trial, and people who do not have money cannot be released, that is against Jewish law. So we don't treat people differently because they're rich or they're poor. And when you do not get released before your trial, it's very difficult to defend yourself, to find counsel, to gather witnesses, etc. So now we have people in state prisons, which make up most of the people incarcerated, 1.1 million people, federal prisons, over 200,000, plus a miscellaneous of other prisons called juvenile institutions, immigration centers, and psychiatric centers where people are involuntarily committed. So now we have all these people incarcerated, and this costs our country untold billions of dollars, not just in government expenses, but for expenses spent by their families, both sending them money, expensive telephone calls, and all kinds of ways of taking advantage of the prisoners. Our previous speaker spoke about what happens when people get out, but I'd like to address people who are still inside. We have a punishment in the United States that's rarely used in the rest of the planet. It's called life in prison without parole. People have told me, stop talking about the violent criminals, talk about the people who committed minor crimes. If we released everybody who committed minor crimes today, we'd still have a mass incarceration problem. Our sentences are too long and people are held too long, and it doesn't do us any good. Longer sentences are not better. They do not make it safer, and they're just longer.
Okay.
Criminal
It's my
criminologists will explain to you that it's the certainty of punishment and not the length of punishment that counts. There's only 3 reasons to keep someone in prison. One is to separate them from society so they don't harm anyone else. Okay, we can agree with that. 2, to punish people so that other people don't commit the crimes. Okay, we can deal with that. But the 3rd reason is retribution. They killed my relative, and therefore they should never be let out. Well, that's against Jewish religion, because the Jewish principles are that true, honest teshuvah, that is, earns forgiveness from God, and should be forgiveness for man. And when you talk to someone who says, listen, I never believe in letting anybody out that committed a murder, that person is not speaking from a Jewish lens. He is speaking from retribution. Retribution causes excessive crime. So the United States has 1.9 million people in prison. We like to describe the population of prisons based on the number per 100,000. We are now at 583, according to the Prison Population Initiative, per 100,000. Australia has 158, 1/3 the number of people. China has 119, if we believe that's accurate. Ireland, 91. Russia, 300. We have twice as many people as Russia per 100,000 in population incarcerated. The number is completely out of hand. What we need to do about it? Well, we need to bring back things like reduced sentencing. The sentences are excessive and they don't do anyone any good. Second of all, if a person behaves and improves in society as recommended by their prison, they should be released on perhaps 80% of their minimum sentence, just the way other countries do and the way that we used to do it. It doesn't do anyone any good to keep people in too long. Right now, we talk in terms of $36,000 per year per person. Sentencing a person to life in prison costs society $1 million. Costs society $2 million. Why is that? Because of the appeals and the process that goes on over 10 or 20 years. In my state, Pennsylvania, we have only executed 3 people since 1976, but we keep the death penalty on the books to enable prosecutors to negotiate for excessively long sentences. And the idea being that if you don't plead to 20 or 30 years, you may have death penalty on the table, even though the current governor and the previous governor of Pennsylvania has announced that they will never sign a death warrant. So the Jewish religion doesn't say much about prisons. You see, the Jewish religion has been teaching us for thousands of years, but prisons have only been invented in the 19th century. The first prison, real prison, that we have was invented in my city, Eastern State Penitentiary, which is downtown in Philadelphia. Recently, doing some genealogical research, I found that my grandfather was incarcerated for 2 years. That was long after I've been working in this space. The prison is someplace that you should visit when you get to Philadelphia. It has a terrific museum, and they reconstructed the Jewish chapel to make it look just like it was when it was being used up to several decades ago. However, there are a number of rabbis who have talked about prisons. One of the greatest rabbis of the 20th century, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, which was led and founded the Chabad movement, spoke about it because he lived in the 20th century. And he talks about how incarcerating people should only be used to the absolute minimum, what is necessary to protect society, protect the victim, and to help the prisoner. When we use retribution as a punishment, we are not following Jewish principles. And Micah told us that we should do justice. Here's my quote from him. He has told you, O man, what is good and where the Lord requires of you only to do justice and to love goodness and to walk modestly with your God. So if you advocate for retribution, in my opinion, you are forgetting Micah's requirement to do justice. Judaism teaches us to treat people fairly and properly. Incarcerating someone past what is necessary to reasonably punish the person for the crimes and to punish society and protect it from society that is unjust and violates Jewish law. Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, in his book Jewish Literacy, stated, because it believes that each human being is created in God's image, the Torah regards every person as possessing infinite and individual value. According to Crime and Consequence, Jewish law tolerates prisons only when absolutely necessary. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that the Torah authorizes punishments, but the Rebbe explains only with the general principles taught by ancient rabbis that eye for an eye for a tooth for the tooth only meant the financial value of the tooth. The Torah punishments would not allow cruel punishments. The Jewish Council on Public Affairs is the umbrella group over 125 Jewish community relations councils. It works actively to fight mass incarceration. The Reform Action Center actually has a lobbyist in Washington working on the issue. And Chabad gave a course at hundreds of locations on the subject recently. Notwithstanding thousands of people actively working to reverse this unacceptable situation, there are powerful economic forces working to incarcerate even more people. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to address you on this subject, and you can address questions to us later.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you for your amazing commitment, volunteering like you have for decades, and for letting us know all these important facts. Now, I would like to have it's my pleasure to have our International Women's League President, Julia Loeb, say hello. So I was told she's here.
I am. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see so many of you on here for this important program. I am so glad that I could actually join you tonight. I've been with region presidents and Torah Fund vice presidents for training, but I wanted to be on tonight. And so far, you know, it's hard to say I enjoy what I hear because it's a difficult issue, but I'm so glad we have such knowledgeable panelists and rabbis to speak to us tonight. And thank you, Lori, and your committee for bringing this to us. You're muted, Lori.
You're muted.
Thank you for your support, as usual, making this possible, Julia. Thanks for saying hello. We're so happy you're here. Well, on a very busy week. Okay, so now I believe Karen Cooker is going to introduce Kayla.
Yes, I am. Karen Cooker fixed her muting problems. Yes, Kayla Meccano is a senior research associate with Measures for Justice. She joined MFJ in January 2022 following her tenure with the Rochester Institute of Technology and the Rochester Police Department, where her knowledge of policing and data analysis informed several local research and evaluation projects. In her current role, Kayla serves as research lead on MFJ's Commons Police Pilot Project, overseeing data management, assisting in the development of a code book and standard operating procedures, and collaborating with partner agencies. In addition to supporting police data transparency efforts, Kayla collaborates with MFJ's research leadership to engage the public around criminal justice data and gather additional insight for project metrics. So we welcome Kayla Meccano.
Thank you. I appreciate the very thoughtful introduction. And thank you all for joining us and having me here tonight. Let's see. I had some slides. Did you want me to pull those up?
You want to do that or me?
Whichever is easier.
All right, I'll be taking you off of the. Okay, I'll put them up there.
Thank you. Oh, perfect. Thank you. I will just start by giving everyone an overview of who Measures for Justice is and what we do. As it says on the first slide here, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization based in Rochester, New York, but we do have several employees, probably about half of our organization now, around the country. So we're East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, South, we're all over the place and continuing to grow. And we are leading a movement to change the future of criminal justice by developing data tools to help communities, including the institutions that serve them, reshape how the system works. So I know it's kind of a lot of talk, but in the grand scheme of things, since 2011, we have been working to make criminal justice data accessible and understandable for anyone across the country to utilize and to look into and better understand. There's a lot of moving parts in the criminal justice system, and it's very difficult to understand how it works, to find data to tell you what's happening and what is not happening. So we have been working on making tools for everyone to kind of get a glimpse into that and then push for change where it seems necessary. It started after our CEO and founder, Amy Bach, was doing research for her book, Ordinary Injustice. I will share information on this with everyone in the follow-up. But she realized in doing this research that, even the agencies who are prosecuting cases or recording this data on their work don't even know the full picture of what is happening right in their own office. So this started our national data portal, which has 20 states worth of court and prosecutor data that you can look at, and I will share the link for that as well. You can go state by state, county by county, and take a look at how court cases look within these areas. And one of the things that I like the most about this portal is that all of the information and measures that are displayed are standardized. And what that means is we are using the same language and the same codes in the data so that you can compare across places, because, even the simplest criminal statutes for burglary look different in every state across different counties. So we have to standardize that in order to make accurate comparisons. After we hit 20 states on the National Data Portal, which was in 2020, we then shifted our focus to the Commons platform. This data tool is community driven and more at the local level. So we currently have 3 prosecutor Commons platforms on our website, and more are on the way. And as Karen said in my bio, we are in the process of piloting 2 police commons. And I have been working around the clock on those as well, hoping to launch them at some point next year. And it has been quite the endeavor. If we could go to the second slide, please. Diving into the Commons platform a little bit further, I should say. We know at Measures for Justice, and as many of the speakers here have said, there is no easy way to measure justice. There is no one justice system across the country, and there is no one place that people can go to find data about what is happening in their community. Criminal justice happens at the local level across the over 3,000 US counties, and as a result, it is incredibly hard to get data and understand it and use it for the criminal justice system. So, as I have on here, data tells a story. We know that each data point represents usually one person or a few people at one point in time, but at Measures for Justice, we try to examine, a multitude of data points to get the big picture of what's happening. So whether it's a prosecutor's office or a police department, what do the crimes look like in the area? What do the criminal court cases look like? How do they move through the system? And one of the selling points of our Commons tool is that we have a policy goal page that is created between the community and the agency. And this is aimed to drive change and reform in that community. And what I mean by a co-created goal is that after we work through all of the agency's data, we sit down with our community advisory board that we have built of community members in that area and put them in the same room as the prosecutor or as the police department. And they have a conversation back and forth of, here's what the data looks like, and here's what we would like to see different. So in the prosecutor platforms that we have live right now, a lot of the policy goal focus is on increasing criminal diversions. So, avoiding some of the extreme sentences or mass incarceration, as Bob was just talking about. But overall, these goals are intended to have an outcome met by a specific date. It's something that we can measure and track it over time to see whether it's working or not, and when the goal is hit and how well that is maintained. So really at the end of the day, at Measures for Justice, we know that data is critical to understand the full scope of an issue, making it much easier to identify areas that may be problematic, what is causing some of these issues, and potential solutions. We know that there's a lot of change to be made and a lot of questions to be asked, and that is what we are here for, trying to get as much data as we can and make it transparent so that reform and policy goals can be as well informed and measurable as possible. And with that, I believe that concludes my spiel for the day. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to sharing additional information after the conversation and any questions that you may have.
Karen?
Before I introduce our last speaker, I just want to remind everyone that Marlene Ostro is handling the chat. Please put your questions in the chat. Our speakers have graciously agreed to respond to your question by email after the program because the program will probably fill up all of our time and we won't have time for the Q&A during the program.
Before you go on, I just wanted to thank Kayla. Sorry, I wanted to interject. That was wonderful and informative. And, without data, you can't know what to do. So obviously you need to know what's happened. So thank you so much for that informative speech. We appreciate it. Thanks. Karen, go ahead.
Yes, our next speaker is Ames Grauert. Ames Grauert is senior counsel and John L. New Justice Counsel in the Brennan Center's Justice Program. He leads quantitative and policy research focused on trends in crime and the collateral cost of mass incarceration. Additionally, he advocates for criminal justice reform policies at the state and federal levels. Previously, Ames Grauert served as an assistant district attorney in the Appeals Bureau of the Nassau County District Attorney's Office, where he reviewed and litigated claims of actual innocence in addition to his appellate work. Before entering public service, he was an associate at Mayor Brown LLP, where he represented criminal defendants pro bono in post-conviction litigation. And we welcome Ames Grauert.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I want to add 2 quick notes to my bio. Number one, I'm a huge fan of Measures for Justice, so it's great to come after you. If I were to explain it to this group, I don't think you would believe me when I describe to you the state of data on the criminal justice system. It's staggering. So the work that Measures for Justice is doing, it's just incredible. And also, we're relatively new members of Bethel in South Orange, New Jersey. So it's especially great to speak to this community. So let me see if I can pull up my presentation now. There we go. Great. So I'm Ames Grauert. I'm senior counsel in the Brennan Center. So just a little background on the center. We're a nonprofit law and policy organization dedicated to repairing the nation's systems of law and justice and democracy. I work in our justice program, which is our initiative focused on the problem of mass incarceration, as we heard about earlier tonight, criminal justice reform, and public safety. Critically for today's conversation, we believe that you cannot have safety without justice, and you can achieve both together. And I think that's a really important conversation that can unfortunately get lost in today's political world. We also believe that good policy starts with good data, which is very, very hard in this world, but a value I know I share with many of you on this call. So what does that mean when we get to tough political questions, especially an issue which you've probably heard a lot about, like bail reform? Well, it's a little bit tough. So I want to talk about a couple of the narratives you've heard about crime over the past couple of years. You've probably heard the idea that bail reform, or so-called progressive prosecutors, that is law enforcement officials, district attorneys, state's attorneys who believe in criminal justice reform, are somehow to blame for crime rising in 2020 amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. But is that true? Well, we're hard at work on a national study of that very issue, but it's not quite done for reasons relating to the overall quality of criminal justice data, but we're working on it. But to give you a sense of where the research is here and what we know about crime and bail reform and these sensitive political issues, I thought I'd talk about a specific case study, which is one that I know the best both because I work there and it's a city that has really good data, which is New York City. So before we go into the subject, I thought I'd answer a broad question, which is, what is bail reform? I think that's something that can be really challenging. It's a superficially simple question, but bail is immensely complicated and a sort of easy system to get lost in the more you think about it. But I'll give you a couple sort of simple examples of policies that have happened around the country to give you an idea of what we're talking about. One example is something that happened in Harris County, Texas, covering Houston by court order, which was that judges can no longer set money bail, which is a pledge of money in return for your freedom and during the pendency of your criminal case. Judges can no longer set that money bail in almost all misdemeanor cases following consent decree and court order that it was being imposed unfairly and resulting in the detention of predominantly lower income people. That's one example of bail reform. Another is New Jersey, where I am based, where the state moved towards a system where release mostly depends on whether you are assessed to pose a risk of flight or a risk to the community, not on money. Releases then, the decisions are made by judges after evaluating your case on a scale and system that they have at hand. And there's New York. And what happened in New York is what we'll talk a little bit about, which is money bail was largely abolished for almost all nonviolent felonies and misdemeanors, but judges can continue to set bail in some special circumstances, such as repeat offenders and almost all violent offenses as well. So these are the sort of policies we're talking about. These initiatives all come about out of a sense that money bail can often lead to very unfair outcomes, with people being held in jail unnecessarily without any consideration for their innocence, their ability to prepare, or their right to be seen as innocent until proven guilty, their ability to mount a defense, their connections to their community, etc. But there are actually many reasons people come to care about bail reform. Prior to this current decade, many bail reforms around the country were actually adopted on a bipartisan basis, and some are still sustained on a bipartisan basis. Just last year, I saw Governor Chris Christie speak about the importance of defending New Jersey bail reform. So the bipartisan criminal justice reform spirit is still alive there. But first, let's talk about why people might be concerned about crime today. And I think there's a very good reason for that. The reason is that violent crime really did rise precipitously during the COVID-19 pandemic. If you look at the data from New York City, from places around the country, you'll see significant increases in murders on the order of 30 to 40% in some cities. You'll see significant increases in shootings as well, and in some aggravated assaults too. Before I go on, I want to share two sort of surprising things you might see about this trend. I'm going to show you a couple other graphs that show exactly what we're talking about when we talk about crime in New York City. Number one, and I think this is a fact that hasn't really seeped into the public consciousness quite yet, things are getting better. If you look at these graphs, you'll see, crime really did peak during the COVID-19 pandemic. There's no use denying it, and I think people need to take this very seriously. But things are getting better, slowly but surely. There are some exceptions to that. Shoplifting in New York, that's actually happened in several cities around the country, really is up over pre-pandemic base levels, so are felony assault. So there's still a lot of work to do, but things are broadly improving from where we were in 2020. And number two, a point I just always like to make whenever we're talking about crime in New York and bail reform in New York, even with these increases, New York City remains one of the safest big cities in the country. So there's this tension we have to navigate when we talk about crime, especially in New York, and that is, there are real problems, there are real issues to talk about, but we can't let hyperbole get the better of us. We have to talk about it seriously based on the facts and where we are. So, regardless of that, these are still really serious increases. So a natural question is, what happened? I think it's understandable to think what changed in 2020. And one of the things that did change in 2020 is the state's bail reform law, which was passed in 2019, went into effect. So it might be natural to sort of jump to a conclusion and say, bail reform might be a contributor to crime in New York City. That explanation immediately runs into a few sort of basic problems. One is that crime rising was not a New York City phenomenon, it was a national phenomenon. When you look at what happened around the country, we saw crime rise in small town America, suburban America, big cities, north, south, east, west, red city, blue city, red state, blue state. It didn't matter. In most places around the country, violent crime rose dramatically. It wasn't just where bail reforms were passed. On the flip side, many bail reform jurisdictions actually saw declines in crime or stabilization around this period. Newark, New Jersey, about a 20-minute drive that way, is a site of major reforms to the state's bail system in 2017, and actually saw crime or murder rates not increase, unlike the rest of the country in 2020. So another problem if you're thinking about why crime might have risen in 2020 and thinking about bail reform as a possible example, is 2020 is a year where a lot of other things happened. We saw the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, which led to court closures. If you look at court data on how long people wait for their pending criminal case, wait times skyrocket. Policing obviously looks different during a respiratory pandemic. So could something else be to blame for why crime rose in 2020? That, in fact, is what the research suggests, but doing that research is very difficult. I'm going to put up a slide that is shows some of the sort of math and concepts we use to talk through separating the difference between correlation, changes in a correlation between something happening and crime rising, and actual causation. Like, just because the things happen at the same time, can we say that one was caused by the other? So this is a regression tool that we use to sort of tease apart the difference between correlation and causation. And what this research tends to show is that there's little, if any, reason to believe that bail reform is the reason that crime rose in New York in 2020. And if you look at studies of bail reform around the country, you find relatively similar findings. Something that can lead to a lot of confusion is there are different studies that say different things. So if you look in Houston, for example, there have been studies doing very simple before and after comparisons of crime in Houston before and after misdemeanor bail reform, and you compare those two numbers, you might see increases in crime. But that's a correlational issue. Again, that's saying crime was low, now it's a little higher, bail reform happened in between, and just assuming that bail reform in the middle is the cause. But that's not the best way to look at the issue when you actually apply the sort of sophisticated math that I can't do, but my co-author on these papers can do. Those arguments start to look a little tougher. But one thing that's really interesting is, I'm not here to tell you that bail reform policies or criminal justice reform policies are always perfect. I think a really challenging reality about our work is we have to live in this gray area where we are working toward the goal of reducing mass incarceration while designing the best policies possible, and constantly trying to figure out what's necessary to innovate and improve the policies that we've crafted. So some of the best research by some folks I work with at a group called Data Collaborative for Justice has tended to show that bail reform has actually reduced recidivism for lower level offenses, but led to some minor increases in recidivism for the very smaller set of cases involving higher risk defendants, to people who have other prior recent arrests. It's a more nuanced way of thinking about the policy. So what does that mean? What can be done? I think it's very possible that these simplistic narratives that so many of us have heard on the news about crime, criminal justice reform, bail reform have led us astray and polarized an issue where we really need to work together and think about issues with greater complexity. Bail reform, based on what we've seen, based on the data that I talked through with you, it's almost never going to be, capital THE, the explanation for crime trends, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. It also means implementation can be extremely difficult. Bail, the criminal justice reform, as Kayla, or the criminal justice system, as Kayla mentioned, is extremely complex. Bail reform is one of the most complex policies that you can adopt in it. You have to make sure that judges, prosecutors, pretrial release agencies, everyone's on the same page. And that doesn't always happen. So I think it means that we should start to think about not just what is the law on the page, how do we improve the law as it's written on the page, but how do we make sure that the people tasked with implementing the law are doing it faithfully and have the money and the resources they need to do it. And the sort of policy changes needed to make that happen look a lot different from the sort of simple ideas that we hear about all too often from in the political world. So I guess if I had to leave you with a point, I'd say this is a really complicated issue. It's one where we certainly need more research, but it's a much more complex one than I think the world has unfortunately been led to believe in many cases. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you all tonight.
Can you take your screen? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ames, and thank you for explaining how complex and difficult it is to analyze these crime trends. Really appreciate all the information and how hard it is to analyze that data. Thank you. We have more screens for you. We have, let's see, before we go to our thank you screens, let's go ahead and talk about, since we didn't have a Q&A, we are going to follow up with emails, as I said before, to the speakers, and when they have a chance, they will answer your questions. So if you be sure to put your questions in the chat, and then we will send those to the speakers, and they will send us, some of them have already spoken about some website links and resources that they have and handouts, and have been gracious enough to want to share those with us. And hopefully you can use those for your sisterhood programs, for education, and for social action ideas in your particular sisterhoods. Also, we can go to the next screen. Be sure to read our thank you screens. This program would not have been possible without the amazing support of our international president, Julia Loeb, our executive director, Rabbi Ellen Wallence Fields, Karen Bellina, all three have done so much to make this program possible, Ann Schimberg, Renee Ravitch, and next screen, please. Please read the rest of our screens. All of these people and organizations have made this possible. It's taken a lot of work. And the next screen, I've had the honor and privilege to work with an amazing committee of amazing, brilliant women, and each and every one of them has worked so hard to make this evening, to make it come to fruition. And thank all of you for doing that. It takes a village, and it really did happen. Finally, one second. I hope you enjoyed this educational program. And again, I want to thank the speakers for their time and consideration and their amazing informative speeches. I already told you the rest about sending the information. Be sure, even right now, you can put your information, your questions, in the chat so that we can forward them. And thank you for attending. Hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Thanks so much.